Hello viewers, today we are going to discuss the continuation of Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding, part 2. The summary: Henry Fielding's novel Joseph Andrews exemplifies richness, variety and a panoramic sweep of English life embedded in the story. The Picaresque tradition, the mock heroic mode, the narrative method using an omniscient narrator, burlesque and comic exaggerations are features which are studied here. The themes of the novel, such as the concept of goodness, charity, etc., are also explained. Before going into the modules, let us quickly look into the objectives. The objectives of this part are: 1. To enable students to critically analyze the novel's style, the narrative technique and other features. Number 2. To analyze the novel's explication of vice and hypocrisy of society. Most of the novelists employ a uniform style in their works. Fielding's prose is a typical of an age which worked within the conventions somewhat different from those of today. Fielding blends mock and true gentility, real learning and makes it a modern style with a smooth narrative flow. The long sentences are typical of Fielding's acidic, bantering style. Phrases like rampant passion for chastity, violent modesty and virtue use their adjectives to contradict their overt meaning. Satirical phrases are used to enliven the narrative. The long passages, like the 2 passages given to Lady Booby, add to the virtual dramatic dialogue that Fielding uses in his narration. The ironic tone in which the dialogues are prepared adds to the satirical mock epic style. For example, every dialogue of Lady Booby suggests her intentions towards Joseph. Again, almost all phases of Joseph politely conveys his deep virtue. The style of this colloquial exchange is a parody of both the contemporary time and style. Joseph Andrews is designed as a comic romance and is structured in the form of a mock epic. The basic method used in a mock epic is that of a burlesque, where insignificant things are treated as if they are of great significance. This is seen in numerous episodes of the novel. The continual shift of viewpoints to the tones of voices adds to make the novel more vivacious and helps in moving the narrative forward and also retain the attention of the reader. Fielding uses irony that is multifaceted and transparent and can be easily recognized, as when Fielding remarks that Mrs. Stowaw's perception of her husband's dalliance with Betty added little to the natural sweetness of her temper, and the reader does understand what her temper is really like. The novel is carefully structured with symmetry and parallels that at times surprises the modern readers with long digressions. Interpolated material, surprising situations serve the purpose of quietly planting certain necessary information in the reader's mind. Another important feature of the narration is the theatrical effect of various scenes. first theme we can discuss in this module is vulnerability and power of goodness. Goodness was a major preoccupation of the writers of the 18th century as it was of the moralists. In an age in which worldly authority was largely unaccountable and tended to be corrupt, Fielding seems to opine that temporal power was not compatible with goodness. In this novel, most of the squires, magistrates, fashionable persons and petty capitalists are either morally ambiguous or actively evil. By contrast, his model of benevolence, Parson Adams, is quite poor and totally dependent for his income on the patronage of the squires. But Fielding shows that Adams' extreme goodness and his ingenious expectation of goodness in others makes him vulnerable to exploitation by unscrupulous persons. Though the novelist presents humiliating pictures of his clergymen, Adams remains an exception because he is a symbol of vital presence whose temporal weakness does not invalidate his moral power. If his naive good nature is no antidote to the evils of hypocrisy and unprincipled self-interest, that is precisely because those evils are so widespread, the impracticality of his laudable principles is a judgment not on Adams or on goodness per se, but on the world. The other theme which we can explore in this novel is charity and religion. I repeat, charity and religion. Fielding's novels are full of clergymen, many of whom are less than exemplary. In the contrast between the benevolent Adams and his more self-interested brethren, Fielding draws the distinction between the mere formal profession of Christian doctrines and the concept of active charity, which he considers as true Christianity. Fielding advocated the expression of religious duty in everyday human interactions. Universal, disinterested compassion arises from the social affections and manifests itself in general kindness to other people. Relieving the afflictions and advancing the welfare of mankind. One might say that Fielding's religion focuses on morality and ethics rather than on theology or forms of worship. As Adams says to the greedy and uncharitable Parson Adams, I quote, "Whoever therefore is void of charity, I make no scruple of pronouncing that he is no Christian." Providence. If Fielding is skeptical about the efficacy of human goodness in the corrupt world, he is nevertheless determined that it should always be recompensed. Thus, when the good characters of Adams, Joseph and Fanny are helpless to engineer their own happiness, Fielding takes care to engineer it for them. The role of the novelist thus becomes similar to that of God in the real world. He is a providential planner, vigilantly rewarding virtue and punishing vice, and Fielding overtly stylized plots and characterization draw the reader's attention to his designing hand. The parallel between plot and providence does not imply that Fielding naively expects that good will always triumph over evil in the real life. Rather, as Judith Hotley argues, I quote, "It implies that life is a work of art, a work of conscious design created by a combination of providential authorship and individual free will." Unquote. Fielding's concern as an author for his characters is not meant to encourage his readers in their everyday lives to wait on the favor of a divine author. It should rather encourage them to make an art out of the business of living by advancing and perfecting the work of Providence, that is, by living according to the true Christian principles of active benevolence. The other theme which we can explore in this novel, town and country. Fielding did not choose the direction and destination of his heroes travel at random. Joseph moves from the town to the country in order to illustrate, in the words of Martin C. Betteston, I quote, "A moral pilgrimage from the vanity and corruption of the great city to the relative naturalness and simplicity of the country." Unquote. Like Mr. Wilson, Joseph develops morally by leaving the city, the site of vanity and superficial pleasures, for the country, the site of virtuous retirement and contented domesticity. Not that Fielding had any utopian illusions about the countryside. The many vicious characters whom Joseph and Adams meet on the road home attest that Fielding believed human nature to be basically consistent across geographic distinctions. His claim for rural life derives from the pragmatic judgment that away from the bustle, crime and financial pressures of the city, those who are so inclined may, as Betteston puts it, attend to the basic values of life. In this module, we are going to explore on the phrases like affectation, vanity and hypocrisy. Fielding's preface declares that the target of his satire is the ridiculous, that the only source of the true ridiculous is affectation, and that affectation proceeds from one of these two causes, vanity or hypocrisy. Hypocrisy, being the dissimulation of true motives, is the more dangerous of these causes, whereas the vain man merely considers himself better than he is. The hypocrite pretends to be other than he is. Thus, Mr. Adams is vain about his learning, his sermons and his pedagogy. But while this vanity may occasionally make him ridiculous, it remains entirely or virtually harmless. By contrast, Lady Booby and Mrs. Slipslop counterfeit virtue in order to prey on Joseph. Parson Adams counterfeits moral authority in order to keep his parish in awe. Peter Pons counterfeits contented poverty in order to exploit the financial vulnerabilities of other servants, and so on. Fielding chose to combat these two forms of affectation, the harmless and the less harmless, by poking fun at them on the theory that humor is more likely than infective to encourage people to remedy their flaws. Chastity. As his broad hints about Joseph and Fanny's euphoric wedding night suggest, Fielding has a fundamentally positive attitude towards sex. He does prefer, however, that people's sexual conduct be in accordance with what they owe to God, each other and themselves. In the mutual attraction of Joseph and Fanny, there is nothing licentious or exploitative, that they demonstrate the virtuousness of their love in their eagerness to undertake a lifetime commitment in their compliance with the Anglican forms regulating marriage, which required them to delay the event to which they have been looking forward for years. If Fielding approves of Joseph and Fanny, though he does not take them too seriously, in particular, Joseph's male chastity is somewhat incongruous, given the sexual double standard, and Fielding is not above playing it for laughs, particularly while the hero is in London. Even militant chastity is vastly preferable, however, to the loveless and predatory sexuality of Lady Booby and those like her. As Martin C. Batterston argues, I quote, "Joseph's chastity is amusing because extreme, but it functions nonetheless as a wholesome antithesis to the fashionable lusts and intrigues of high society." Characters of Joseph Andrews and Parson Adams. Joseph is the protagonist of the novel who goes through varied experiences and ultimately becomes successful in his pursuit of happiness through legitimate means. Parson Adams is also a very significant character in the novel. Since the novel is based on epic conventions, both the protagonists display characteristics of an epic hero who, by convention, is usually a warrior, a man of strength and acumen. In Joseph Andrews, we therefore get to see two men of strength, prowess, virtue and acumen. Both Parson Adams and Joseph Andrews are the epitome of benevolence and charity. Parson Adams plays the role of the ridiculous and essentially a moral guide whose influence on Joseph is remarkable. But it is through the rise and fall of Joseph and his varied experiences in life that the theme of the novel is revealed. The growth and development of Joseph's character leads to the growth of the readers in perceiving the motive of Fielding. The story of the novel begins with the history of Joseph's parentage, and its penultimate chapter, Book 4, Chapter 15, reveals Mr. Wilson as his true father. Through experiences of the world, Joseph explores his own self. Joseph develops, matures and becomes impressive, whereas Adams is already a mature character. He often appears fallible. He preaches extreme doctrine, but in private life he hardly practices it. For example, Adams suggests to Joseph to be resilient and accept fate with resignation, but himself gives way to extreme passion when he mistakenly believes that his son has been drowned. Both Adams and Joseph are personally chaste and are charitable towards others, yet it is Joseph who amidst all troubles shows himself a winner. Both Joseph and Parson Adams are often used as foils to each other's characters, even as complements to each other. Mock heroic elements in the novel. In the late 17th century, the style in vogue was mock heroic as used by Dryden in Macflackno and Pope in The Rape of the Lock. Fielding states that his novels are never mock heroic, but he does use some mock heroic conventions to entertain, as in Book 1, Chapter 2, an anticlimax is used with reference to Joseph's great-grandfather. Picaresque Tradition. Joseph Andrews is often described by critics as a picaresque novel. The Picaresque novel was popular during the 16th and 17th centuries, narrating the adventures of someone such as an orphan or a criminal. The Picaro is a kind of adventurer whose journey took him through variety of kinds of life, especially low life, before he was rewarded with richness and happiness. Joseph Andrews definitely follows this pattern. Joseph, though not exactly leading a low life definitely in the beginning, he hardly has any identity. At the end of the novel, he definitely gains a true identity as the character Joseph grows. Thus, in this aspect, it can be said that Joseph Andrews follows the pattern of a Picaresque novel. Therefore, it can be concluded that Fielding's Joseph Andrews is an excellent example of the novel as it came to be a popular in the 18th century. This is only a revision of what we have covered in our modules or the lessons, taking as points in importance. The first point which we can take is look into is the difference of Fielding's style from mock heroic one. In the late 17th century, the style in vogue was mock heroic as used by Dryden in Macflecknoe and Pope in The Rape of the Lock. Fielding states that his novels are never mock heroic, but he does use some mock heroic conventions to entertain us. Joseph Andrews definitely follows this pattern, though not exactly. In certain aspects, Joseph Andrews follows the pattern of a Picaresque novel. And can you say how burlesque is used in Joseph Andrews? Joseph Andrews is designed as a comic romance and is structured in the form of a mock epic. The basic method used in a mock epic is that of a burlesque. And can you identify any special features in this novel? The novel is carefully structured with symmetry and parallels that at times surprises the modern readers with long digressions. Interpolated material, surprising situations serve as the purpose of quietly planting certain necessary information in the reader's mind. And another important feature which we can see in this narration is the theatrical effect, evoked during various scenes in the novel. And how can you say that the plot form is in an episodic style? The important feature of the novel is that the incidents are structured on various journeys. These involves the unraveling of the situation which moves the plot forward. Thus, the plot is also formed into an episodic style. And can you talk on the relationship between Joseph Andrews and Pamela? Fielding initially aims at parodying the situation at Richardson's Pamela, a poor servant and her dire attempt in remaining sexually chaste when pressed by the advances of a wealthy employer. Joseph Andrews mocks Pamela as a supposed model of virtue. Though Pamela directly does not appear in the novel, yet Joseph, a man, is shown here defending his virginity against Lady Booby. And coming to the various devices used in the novel, Joseph Andrews is not a perfect parody or a burlesque, but an admixture of satire, imitation of reality and mock heroic touches, making the novel comic, trying to deflate or mock the contemporary subject by implied contrast between the high diction and the lower reality life. Can you make a note of all the Christian values illustrated in the novel? Let us see. Within the novel, Fielding puts in Christian values and the idea of charity and good work. Joseph Andrews is also a demonstration of the reasonableness of benevolence, love not only for those who are generous, but also for those who are charitable, happy and optimistic. A belief in salvation through grace and faith is expressed throughout the novel. And can you name any 5 main characters in which the novel revolves around? We can say the novel essentially revolves around 5 characters like Parson Adams, Joseph Andrews, Fanny Goodwill, Mrs. Slipsop and Lady Booby. Can you discuss the theme of class and birth in the novel of Joseph Andrews? Joseph Andrews is full of class distinctions and concerns about high and low birth, but Fielding is probably less interested in class difference per se than in the vices it can engender, such as corruption and affectation. He disapproves of those who pride themselves on their class status to the point of deriding or exploiting those of lower birth. With this, we end part 2 of Joseph Andrews. See you in the next class. Bye.